Welcome to week two. Uh, this week, I just wanted to start off by kind of going over the assignment and kind of breaking down what you guys are going to be doing. On Tuesday, we're going to get a little more in depth, and I'm going to have some discussion on this stuff, hopefully. On Tuesday, I wanted to kind of poll you guys and ask what kind of, based on reading through this stuff and hearing this kind of short video today, what kind of strategies you guys have for creating the baseline documents for clients. So just kind of overview what we're doing here. Working with clients is, it's really, we get the nuts and bolts of kind of the design process in the web and user experience in the first web UX course, but that doesn't really cover as much as it should client interactions and things of that nature. So for the second assignment here, what we're going to do is go a little further in depth into this baseline process of creating the background documentation for a client. Before I go too far into that, I do want to say and just kind of acknowledge that this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach at all. I'm going to show you a sample design contract, something similar to what I would use with my freelance work. But keep in mind, the reason I'm not showing specific ones, A, is because of non-disclosure agreements, but B, really each project that you do requires a different retool of your contract. I'll redo graphics for the contract. I'll redo the length of the contract, the verbiage of the contract, all based on who the client is and what their level of understanding of this kind of document is. You have to read the room is the idea. Whenever you're dealing with any client, try to assess whenever you first meet them or talk to them or however you interact with them first, try to assess how savvy they are with documentation and things of that nature. Some people don't want to be bothered with it at all. Some people really want to see good, heavy documentation. And a lot of times, how much you get paid is based on how well you fit your client's expectations. That's the whole game here. So just to kind of go through this, you meet a client, that's step one, and you discuss the project. Now, you guys should be, in this first meeting with the client, should be taking pretty copious notes, I'm hoping. Then what you do after the meeting with the client, the day of or the day after, very quickly, you go home and you create some sort of background documentation that's akin to a proposal. That can take a whole lot of different forms. I've done these things as PowerPoint presentations. I've done these as just couple page documents to hand to somebody. I've done them as slick binders. Again, it all depends on the client. Okay, I think presentations for classes, it's the same idea. So I'm just going to go through this. Think as a designer, you're responsible for taking all of this content. The client has an idea of what they want this thing to look like. The contract, and it's not necessarily a contract we're doing here. This is more just a proposal from your end. Every client I work with wants some kind of solid breakdown of what the project is and what I am going to do as a designer to help them out with it. And that's what we're talking about here. They're giving you their pictures, their text, their video, and you're turning that into a cohesive, interactive piece, right? So the work starts with a solid proposal. Now, these are the things that should absolutely be in every proposal to one degree or another of detail. Like I'm saying, a client that's going to pay you $20,000 by necessity should have a more in-depth proposal to encompass what their idea is, but also to satisfy that $20,000 bar, as opposed to a client who's paying you $500. I wouldn't do as much work on the documentation. So these things still need to be in there, just to greater or lesser detail, depending on what the job is, okay? So first things first, you should have some sort of background and some sort of bio almost. And this is going to be something from if you have a website. If you don't have a website, you should think about making one for this class for you as a freelancer. But it should be some sort of verbiage that tells about who you are as a designer, what your ethos is. Do you match with the client in any way, shape, or form? Hopefully you do. This is build some sort of trust is the idea. The second one, speak to the client's business in an informed way via research into the client's business, industry, and demographic client base. So just to kind of describe what you guys are doing for this project, I'm having you guys create a small business that's a website or app, again, depending on what you want to do, because we're just going to do the prototyping at this phase, because this is mostly a fact-finding type of mission here for us. Let's say you're creating, again, for this week, a small business website. I want you to focus on something fairly small for this one. This business can be real. It can be ideally, it would be a real world case study. It doesn't have to be someone you know. You could just pick a business out of from scratch on the web that has a not great website that you'd like to redesign, or a business that doesn't have a website at all. It'd be better if you knew someone you could actually help them out with this. But it doesn't have to be. You can make one up completely from scratch. The idea is, though, whatever business you come up with, you have to research that business. So say, for instance, you would pick like I said, down as an example down further, say for example, you pick a coffee house or something of that nature. If you're going to be doing research on a coffee house, for instance, you could go through, I've got down here an example of that, and you could pull up some statistics, right? You could do some research and find out how many people, from what segment. Again, you identify who the consumers are, you're going to talk to the clients and figure out who their customer base is. And they can do a little research and put some data in there, as frequency of daily coffee consumption, this kinds of things. You can dig up a little bit of data on the web through a little bit of Googling, and do some research on the client's company, business, and industry, and put a few details in there, especially about the demographic client base, because we're going to use that to build from. That's the idea. So you got to research this. After you meet with the client and you determine what their business is, Google it. Essentially, Google the entire industry, Google how that industry works, figure out what the client does. It happens many times in this industry where you're going to work for a client where you have no idea what they do. I'll talk about that a little bit more on Tuesday and give you some concrete examples of that. But yeah, the research is really important. It shows the client that you are informed. So you want to include a section. It could be a whole page. I would prefer it would be a whole page about research into clients' business and industry and demographic client base. We'll go into that further, how to kind of tackle some of these demographic things later. But try to get at least a little bit of data in there. Graphical data is what I'm talking about here. Take these kinds of breakdowns, do a little bit of research, but break it down into graphics. That's kind of our whole job as designers, is to take data that is intangible and make it tangible for people who don't understand it through graphics. So make some charts, make some graphs, do some things of that nature, break them down into slick looking presentations. Take a little bit of time. Detail the client's specific project needs. There needs to be a page that talks about the client's project needs and objectives. Have a whole page that's just a summary of what you talked to about this site with the client. So what did the client want you to do? Did they want you to redesign the site? What's the scope of that? Did they want you to redesign everything on the site or just portions of it? Is this site from scratch? What does that entail? Go into specific details. If you have to write jargony specifics in this section, do it. This is where you could put things like HTML, front end HTML needed to redesign page layout. CSS needed to redesign styling of elements and header and footer, things of that nature. Break it down bit by bit. The more stuff you put into these two sections, the client's needs and your solutions to those project needs, technical and otherwise, the more money you make. If a client can see exactly what you're doing for this project, they feel more comfortable handing you thousands of dollars. If you're vague in this section, they don't know what they're getting. And again, if the site's going for, say it's a $5,000 site, a decent site where you're designing a good amount of stuff on it content wise, they're going to want to see the specifics of that and not know that you're just doing the website. You have to be very specific and detailed to comfort them and to get the money out of their hands, essentially, is what it comes down to. That should dovetail into a section that is a timeline of some sort. Again, how you do this is totally up to you. You could use a Gantt chart. You could do a very simple bullet pointed list, but it should be a very specific breakdown. It should be something that is a week by week or a day by day, depending on the timeline of the project, a concrete breakdown. Week 1, I am collecting from you as the client. I'm going to collect the content, the text content for the about section and the homepage and the project section of your website. Let's say that. So then you can put, due dates for yourself on there and due dates for the client on there. The client is getting you a lot of the content that goes on this website, or at least the raw things that become the content. So you have to give them assignments and yourself assignments as well to make sure that the site gets done on time, or the app gets done on time. So that's a very important section. That the timeline's a pretty important piece that can be updated and changed and will be, but you have to start somewhere. And then the most important thing, that again, I'll talk about more on Tuesday, some sort of bid, a project bid. I'll talk about pricing and price structures and ways you can frame these bids to keep yourself safe and to keep the client safe on Tuesday. But there's a lot of ways to structure payments, and we'll kind of talk about that. The verbiage needs to be in there. Okay. So as I said, their project this week is to identify a small business, again, a real one or fake one, and design a good proposal that covers all those elements. And I want you to knock out a quick website wireframe. So let me go into really quickly. Here's an example. This is just on Doc Sketches, just a free website that I pulled up a contract from. There's a million examples of graphic and web design contracts. It's the same thing. You could pull a design contract from anywhere as long as it is plain language. So this is a good example of a plain language contract. This is not a lot of legalese. This one's a little light. This would be good for someone who's like a $2,500 client who's not looking for a whole lot of detail. Anything above that, you'd have to add some stuff to these sections. Graphics especially. This contract is a baseline starting point. You don't want to give, as a designer, a contract that looks like this to a client. You want to put graphics in it because you're a designer. So you'd want to put a cover page with your logo on it, perhaps a header graphic and a footer graphic of some kind, nothing obnoxious, but do a little bit of design work for this to individualize it. That's fairly important, that you put your stamp as a designer on your contract. You need to create your own corporate branding for consistency. That's very important. But if you look, this is very simple. You can even change this, just this web design agreement entered into by this person and this person on this date. This is the basic stuff. Look, project description right here, okay? Talking about deliverables, when things are due. There's a schedule, right? Client approval, this is a good idea. Talks about client revisions and how much that costs. It talks about payment inside here. So this thing has, like, again, if you kind of scroll through it, there's like liabilities and talks about severability and legal fees if anything happens like that. This is a pretty straightforward contract. Now they have a more in-depth contract here that you could look through as well. This is just one that I Googled. There are many examples of them out there. But for a baseline contract, a very simple plain language contract like this is not a bad thing to start with, and then dress up a little bit to make it look a little bit more professional. As far as the wireframe, because again, what I'm going to have you do is create the proposal for this thing. Again, and then after the proposal, do a wireframe. I've got a little link here. Look through this website, and you can watch through the video if you want. I'm looking for a very simple website wireframe. When I talk website wireframe, this is a great example. Is this a very fast and simple paper prototype? This class, we're going to talk about the first class, we kind of touched on paper prototypes and the UX style process of prototyping, which has its benefits and its detractions. This is a simple wireframe, more of a web design style of mockup. These are the kind of things we do at my freelance job all the time on big sheets of paper with Sharpie. We do big website wireframes. You can do these. Yours can look exactly like this. Sketchy pencil style stuff is what I'm talking about here. So this is just to get your ideas down on paper. Keep in mind, you want to do this fast. This is something that you would produce with the proposal in a day, both a proposal and this wireframe mockup. You would crank out the day after you meet with the client. So you don't want to wait on this. You don't want to create a huge elaborate piece. You want to start getting your ideas of what this site is going to look like down on paper so that the client doesn't come up with their own. Okay. This is to limit the amount of freedom that the client has. And I'll talk about that a lot more on Tuesday. But a quick wireframe sketch to cement the ideas on paper is a necessary first step. So that's what I want you guys to do. So there's the breakdown. This is a really simple create a decent proposal and a simple prototype. Again, I'll kind of clarify this a little bit more on Tuesday. Here's some great videos about writing contracts. If you haven't, again, if you're a little in the weeds with this about creating a customized contract for yourself, there's 2 videos here that are great for that. Here's a video on prototype fidelity. We're going to talk about this a lot. So watch through that stuff. And then on Tuesday, we'll have a couple of discussions about this stuff, and I'll try to get your input on it, and we'll see what everybody thinks. All right. Good luck.